When the mind shouts, God whispers. I thought about saying perhaps when the devil shouts, God whispers. And I guess in a symbolic way that would work, but I don't believe in the devil. I think it's a idea to express the archetype of, you know, negative intentions, immoral intention. So that's fine. You say it however you want. But God whispers. We think about sometimes the idea of unanswered prayers or something like that. Um, or even in the Bible when people, proclaim to have heard the voice of God, etc. Um, I've never heard God, but we've communicated. I've never heard God, but we've communicated. I say God whispers because thoughts, instincts, feelings, um, sometimes this is God trying to get through to you. Events, occurrences, things that happen around you, circumstances, situations. Um, Sometimes they're just a precursor to something. And I say mind slash, the devil, which mind is not evil. It's just a tool. But, you can't bring you don't want to bring a chainsaw into the kitchen to cut a piece of cake, right? So you want the right tool for the job and you want to know what to listen to within yourself. Mind is not always the answer. Mind, in the context of which I'm speaking, can be impulsive. Mind shouts, okay? Your mind wants to get out of a bad situation right now. Sometimes that's useful. Sometimes it's not, depending upon what actions you have to take to remove yourself, right? God whispers because a lot of the times, the better decision, if it's not a life or death situation or a situation where time is so limited for you to make a decision, it is better to exercise patience most of the time. At least that's my experience. You you look at your experience and see if it fits. See if what I'm saying is appropriate. I don't profess to know everything. I don't profess to have all of the answers. I'm just sharing my insights based upon my professional experience, my research over the years, and gnosis, things I go through daily, the trials and tribulations that I've had and continue to go through, to be honest. Okay. And this is for everybody. But sometimes the inclination, the voice that we really need to listen to is the one that's not the loudest. And it's not the one that is repeatedly in our mind. It's the one that's kind of in the background or off to the side. It's like, yeah, you could do this, but this this impatient, this impatient force within me is beginning to take hold. And why is that? I think that that can be a signal of stress, a signal of other things going on in one's life. Are you sleeping? Are you eating? Are you lonely? Are you hungry? Are you tired? You know, um, there's something I learned since I've been a counselor, that was HALT, HALT, hungry, angry, lonely, tired. And what it is it's a self check measure. HALT meaning to pause or stop, right? You stop and you ask yourself, am I hungry, angry, lonely, or tired? I think it's useful. I don't use it enough. I tend to think, yeah, I know when I'm hungry. Yeah, I know I'm tired. And I'll say this, as I've gotten older, I listen to my body more. I really do. Um, your body is trying to tell you something, even if you have pain somewhere. Somebody would say, "Oh, it's telling me that this hurts," right? But there are there are counseling techniques, psychological um, treatment modalities that kind of take a bit from Eastern practices and tell you to connect with that pain. You know, um, have make space for it. Try to understand it. Draw your consciousness there to that area. And I would say do the same when it comes to the impulsivity, that that inclination that you may have in your mind to do the thing that's not the best for you. You know, why are you being impatient? Why do you have that impulsivity? Can you direct it elsewhere? Is it best for you to just go lay down and go to sleep? Right? Um, think about how many issues people get into that we see on the news that stem from ego. There was a football player, Inky Johnson, and I had watched a couple of his motivational lectures, and he talked about people having ego wars. And I think in some of my previous videos, I talked about how dangerous the ego is, and how um, even in Kabbalah, what they refer to as Jewish mysticism, they talk about how like the main goal of this life is to like transcend ego, right? But these ego wars that we get into, ego can go so many different ways where, I'm the best, I deserve this, I deserve that, I'm better than you, I deserve this more than you. And it can go to, I'm the victim, you hurt me, you did this to me, why is everybody against me, right? These are all stem from ego. And getting away from that requires you to really sit down and examine yourself, examine your feelings, examine where your pain may stem from, your lack, if you are experiencing that. You know, Carl Jung, uh, he, I guess, pretty much created the idea of shadow work. Um, Shadow work is useful, forces you to be very honest with yourself. You can look up prompts online for shadow work, to kind of see how to comb through your own your own thoughts, your own mind, your past, your shadow, right? The things that are more undesirable. Because I don't care how much spirituality you read into, how much metaphysics, Eastern philosophy, esoteric information. Um, the thing is, like, you're still casting a shadow. We can talk about the idea of being an enlightened being. I don't I don't know if I'm qualified to speak about that. I don't feel like I'm qualified to speak about what an enlightened person goes through. What I'm trying to say is I don't think anybody's perfect. You cast a shadow even if you don't act on the whims of that shadow, even if you don't have a reaction, an outward reaction to it. Mentally, emotionally, you may wrestle with it. You may have to tamper it down. The mind is very mischievous. You ever have stray thoughts, things that you don't really want to do, but it just pops in your mind like randomly? You could be talking to a person at the store and you're just thinking, what would happen if I just punched them in the face right now? And nothing prompted that. They didn't do anything. Just a thought. The same thing happens when you have been doing well. The ego gets in the way. Maybe you think that you're doing so well that everything I'm doing um, is untouchable. You may feel untouchable. It's not true, but that's the trick, you know. And I feel like God whispers until He brings the hammer down. And you could say it's God. You could say it's natural law, cause and effect, karma. I think it's all pretty appropriate. I use all of that interchangeably sometimes. Karma may be the most appropriate word uh, because it's like every action has to have a reaction. Every effect has a cause. And that's where you get into the aspect of causality, right? Trying to um, get ahead of the curve. Okay, I'm going to do this so that this happens next. And causality can get very deep and it can go into a lot of things that I'm just not going to mention here. But within our individual lives, we can kind of see what the domino effect could be, right? Really try to be aware of our surroundings, of our environment, and of what consequences could be. Everybody doesn't think about consequences because it's too caught up in ego. I'm mad right now, right? Or I'm depressed right now. And when we feel these emotions, we feel like we have to do something to make them go away. I'm here to tell you to be patient, think about your options, because when feel like we're in trouble, our options appear to get very narrow, very slim. But that's not necessarily the case. We got to think outside the box. We may have to call a professional. We may have to call our friends or family if we have that, if we're blessed enough to have that. We may have to really sit down and have some gratitude. And then on top of that, if you really want to get into the spiritual piece, you got to work off the karma. You got to work through the karma. And that takes time. And it takes a commitment. You may have to give yourself a pep talk like this to remind yourself. But I think that's about it. Peace.